Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify one of the most frustrating, ubiquitous, and honestly, absolutely fascinating systems that governs our daily lives: bureaucracy. We deal with it everywhere, right? At the DMV, at work, in healthcare, in government. But where did it actually come from, and why on earth is it designed the way it is? So why do we hate bureaucracy so much? I mean, we all know the pain of endless red tape, rigid rules, and waiting in line for a stamped form just to get, another stamped form. But the crazy twist here is that the founder of modern sociology didn't see this as a nightmare at all. He actually believed it was the absolute pinnacle of human efficiency and organizational genius. So how did we get from his utopian vision of perfect efficiency to the modern headaches we all experience today? Well, here is our roadmap to figure that out. First, we'll meet Max Weber. Then we'll explore his 3 types of authority, dissect the bureaucratic ideal, compare Weber versus Taylor, and finally look at the flaws in the machine. Let's dive in.
Section 1. Meet Max Weber, the founder of modern sociology.
To truly grasp the bureaucratic system, we first really need to understand the mind that systematically analyzed it and gave it a name. Max Weber was a prominent German sociologist and political economist, and his background heavily influenced his theories. Born in 1864 into an intellectually lively home, frequented by leading politicians no less, he was basically steeped in massive ideas from day one. He pursued extensive studies across law, economics, history, and philosophy. He became a professor at major universities, and, pretty significantly, in 1918, he even served on the committee drafting the Constitution of the Weimar Republic. You can really see how this extensive, multidisciplinary study of law and macroeconomics shaped his highly structured, bird's-eye view of human society. He was looking at how massive populations are organized and governed. Now, before Weber came along, the term bureaucracy was basically a dirty word. It was used as an insult, but he became the very first social scientist to move away from those derogatory connotations. In major works like The Protestant Ethic and The Spirit of Capitalism, Weber gave bureaucracy a completely neutral scientific meaning. He stepped back and analyzed it as a highly rational, calculated way to organize large-scale human undertakings. He wasn't insulting it, he was meticulously diagramming it. Moving on to Section 2. 3 types of authority and how power is legitimized. Before Weber could even define bureaucracy, he needed to explain a fundamental concept: authority. He made a really sharp distinction between power, which is just forcing someone to obey you, and authority. Authority exists only when subordinates voluntarily obey because they genuinely believe their superior has a legitimate right to tell them what to do. He broke this legitimacy down into 3 pure types. The first is charismatic authority. This is rooted entirely in the extraordinary personal qualities of an individual. Think of a highly magnetic revolutionary leader or a visionary startup founder. Their inspiration just effortlessly draws followers. In this kind of setup, commands are based strictly on the leader's unique, almost supernatural inspiration, rather than any established rulebook. The second type is traditional authority. This one is rooted in people's belief in age-old customs. Think of a monarchy or a hereditary chief. Here, obedience is given to a specific person based strictly on precedent and usage. We obey because, well, that's just the way it has always been done. The authority is vested in the person, not necessarily a formal legal office. So the crucial point for us is this third type: rational legal authority. This is the dominant form in our modern institutions. It is based on a rigid system of laws, statutes, and regulations. It's rational because it's designed specifically to achieve goals, and it's legal because power is exercised through rules attached to an office, not the individual person. You aren't obeying John or Jane. You're obeying the manager or the director, regardless of who currently holds that title. Seeing these side by side brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between these worlds. Under charismatic authority, the source of legitimacy is personal quality. The authority is vested in a specific person, and commands come from inspiration. But under rational legal authority, legitimacy comes from laws. Authority lives in the office itself, and commands are based on written rules and procedures. This provides a stable, predictable, and rule-bound framework that doesn't just collapse because a charismatic leader leaves or happens to have a bad day. This exact concept was the rock-solid foundation for modern administration. Which brings us to Section 3, the bureaucratic ideal, a yardstick for comparison. Building upon that rational legal foundation, Weber constructed his famous model of bureaucracy. Now, it's incredibly important to clarify what Weber meant by an ideal type. We hear the word ideal and we immediately think of a utopia, right? A perfect paradise. But that is not what Weber meant at all. An ideal type is just a theoretical model. It's a generic mental construct used as a standardized yardstick for research. Basically, it's a scientific checklist. By establishing this pure extreme model, researchers could look at actual real-world organizations and measure exactly how much they deviated from this purely rational baseline. So what does this pure model look like? The specific anatomy of this ideal bureaucracy relies on a few core features. First, a strict hierarchy of offices. Second, a clearly defined sphere of competence, meaning you know exactly what your job is and, just as importantly, what it isn't. Next, selection is based on technical qualifications, like a diploma or a test, rather than just who you know. Business is conducted by comprehensive written rules. And crucially, impersonality. Officials are expected to be entirely detached, conducting business without regard for personal feelings or favoritism. These curated attributes were specifically designed to make the system completely objective, stripping away human irrationality to make it technically superior and perfectly reliable.
Next up, Section 4, Weber versus Taylor, macrostructure versus microtask.
To fully grasp Weber's massive contribution to classical administrative theory, it really helps to compare him to another giant of his era, his contemporary Frederick Winslow Taylor. Both of these guys wanted peak efficiency, but they looked at entirely different ends of the telescope. Weber's bureaucratic theory had a macro-level focus. He was looking at the overall administrative structure, creating a rational legal framework for the organization's anatomy from the top down. Taylor's scientific management, on the other hand, had a totally micro-level focus. Taylor was right there on the shop floor with a stopwatch, doing time and motion studies to find the absolute one best way for a worker to shovel coal or lift a heavy object. While Taylor provided the intelligence for shop floor mechanics and individual tasks, Weber provided the vast structural buttress for the entire macro organization. But, they actually had a whole lot in common. Both theories hold a highly mechanistic outlook on organizations. They literally treat the workplace like a giant machine. Both are completely obsessed with improving efficiency and achieving ultimate rationality. And, as a direct result, both severely neglect the human factor. Despite working at different scales, both theorists essentially treated human beings as depersonalized cogs in a machine, motivated either by rules or by a paycheck, but largely devoid of complex social and emotional needs.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, Flaws in the Machine. What happens when rationality fails? Let's examine where Weber's hyper-rational system falls apart in practice, building into those exact modern frustrations we all experience today. The very features designed to ensure efficiency can actually lead to total organizational paralysis. The sociologist Robert K. Merton coined a brilliant term for this: trained incapacity. Critics argue that this extreme, unyielding emphasis on written rules leads to severe behavioral rigidity. Bureaucrats become so thoroughly trained to follow the rules that they become defensive and utterly incapable of adapting to unique human cases. The training itself literally makes them incapacitated. And this leads directly to what's known as goal displacement. This happens when the means, so the endless rules, the forms, the procedures, become more important than the actual ends, which are the organization's goals. Following the red tape to protect one's job becomes way more important than actually providing the service the organization was originally built to provide. The rulebook essentially becomes the false god of the office.
And there are darker flaws here, too. Robert Mitchell's pointed out something he called the iron law of oligarchy. Now, Weber envisioned a perfectly neutral system, right? But Mitchell's argued that instead of being politically neutral, bureaucracy inevitably concentrates massive power into the hands of a few elites at the very top of the hierarchy. And then, these elites use the organization and its rules not for the public good, but for their own self-interest in survival. Ultimately, Weber's model has been labeled a machine model theory because it operates as a closed system. It completely ignores social psychological influences, individual judgment, and the informal groups that just naturally form when human beings gather together. It also completely fails to account for rapid external environmental changes and the highly complex, flexible developmental needs of emerging nations. A rigid, rule-bound system simply cannot pivot when the world outside the office suddenly changes.
All of this brings us to a really compelling crossroads. On one hand, we desperately need the stability, fairness, and predictability of Weber's rational legal framework to run our massive modern world. But on the other hand, we also desperately need flexibility, empathy, and adaptability. So as you navigate the red tape of your own life this week, I want to leave you with this final thought. Can we ever build a system that is both perfectly rational and perfectly human? Or is a little bit of chaos just the price we have to pay for keeping our humanity intact?